And I think really in times where I felt a bit bullied by my community or the people around me for whatever choices that I was making with my body, and what I was doing sexually. I think that what really got me through it is having even just a one person as somebody that I could turn to.
This is the Global Travel Channel podcast show, and I am your host, Mark Philpott. Oh yeah, it's time for another podcast show. Hi folks, welcome back. I hope you are all safe and well wherever you are in the world, and I'm so pleased that I've got this opportunity to bring you another show today, no matter where you are. A couple of things before we get going. The first one is it's the inaugural 2019-2020 Global Travel Channel Podcast Awards. Yes, this year we're running our first award show. It's going to be on June the 9th, and you still have a number of weeks to get in there and vote for your favourite podcast guest from this show. All you have to do is go to the website, www.globaltravelchannel.com. Check out as many episodes as you can of my amazing guests that have been on the show, and then vote for them. Yes, there's an awards page on their website. There's many different categories that you can actually put your votes in for. You have one vote per category. That's it. So go ahead and vote for your favourite guest. And who knows, my guest today might be your favourite guest. So listen closely. And if that is the case, you know what to do. The other thing is, if you can leave us a review or some comments about the show you listened to today, we'd love to get feedback on whether you like the material, whether you like our guests, and whether you like the subject matter that we are talking about. So a review is a handy thing for us. And don't forget to tell a friend, a family member, or even a work colleague about the Global Travel Channel podcast show. We'd like to increase our listenership across the world. Okay, let's get on to today. And we are all living in crazy times, that's for sure. And none more so than me. Who would have thought when I started the podcast show last year I would be doing a show on sex? Yes, indeed. That was a great big gulp that I just did then. So today's show is about sex and travel and, well, dare I say it, everything in between. So why don't we get on over to meet my guest for today? And her name is Kayla Yoder. Kayla, welcome to the Global Travel Channel podcast show.
Thank you so much for having me, Mark. It's a pleasure to be here.
Fantastic. And how are you today?
I am great. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing really well. I've got to say though, I'm a little bit nervous. I haven't done anything talking about sex, and to be honest with you, I didn't think that I would be doing a show about sex when I started off this podcast journey, but I'm excited to do it because I think there's a lot of things that we can uncover today. So first of all, let's start off by telling my audience exactly whereabouts in the world you are talking to us from today.
Okay. Well, today I am in St. Louis, Missouri. Back to my roots, where I grew up. Yeah.
So St. Louis is where you grew up.
Yes.
And when you say today, have you just recently returned from somewhere, have you?
Yes. I was just recently staying with my mom for a few weeks in Fort Lauderdale. Yeah, but with the current global situation, I've been popping around. I'm homeless, so it's been a pleasure to get some time with my parents. So, yeah.
Fantastic. So St. Louis, Missouri. So
Yeah.
I tell you what I normally do for my guests is I give you 60 seconds to brag about your city and tell everybody listening around the world why they should come and visit St. Louis, Missouri. So how do you want to position that? Do you want to tell all my guests what are the great things to do there in St. Louis?
Oh man. Well, honestly, I would say our biggest claim to fame is Nelly. 100%.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, we've also got the Cardinals, which I am not personally a huge baseball fan, but they are a pretty spectacular sports team. And we also have toasted ravioli and frozen custard. So,
Whoa.
yeah, I know, mind blown, right?
Toasted ravioli.
Yeah, so basically you take raviolis and you just fry them and eat
Yeah.
them with marinara sauce. It's absolutely delicious.
Oh my goodness, that sounds. And what was the other one?
Frozen custard, which is,
Frozen custard.
in my opinion, the best form of ice cream. It's just a little bit more eggy and a little creamier, thick. It's
Right.
delicious. Yep, yep.
Okay, I'm booking a ticket to St. Louis as soon as this this thing is over.
That was quick. That wasn't much to convince you.
Well, it's food, so you've got me to start off with. Yeah. Okay, so what else is there going on in St. Louis? What is it a city that you'd bring a family for a holiday, or is it more of a single couple type place?
I would actually say that it's a really good place for young couples starting families.
Right.
So it's a really great place for, it's actually, we have a huge park, which was designed for the first World's Fair.
Yeah.
And we have a science center. There's really a ton of stuff to do here for free.
Yeah.
And it's really multicultural, especially for a city in the middle of the US. So yeah, there's just a lot to do for free, and so it's a really great place if you're raising kids or just starting a family for you to put down some roots.
Okay, so St. Louis, Missouri, everybody's coming now, and we're going to make sure the hotels are booked out and everything after this virus. Now, have you been on a podcast show before?
I have not, so I am also a
Ah.
bit nervous. You are popping my podcast cherry today.
Well, I hate to burst your bubble, but you're not the first time I've had that on the show. So, I just hope I don't have any performance anxiety on the show today, because I haven't dived into your subject matter of expertise. So let's see how that goes. But welcome to your first podcast, and I'm going to ask you at the end how you enjoyed it, and you got to be honest. Tell me if you think it was a rotten experience, but hopefully you're going to have a lot of fun. And it's a great world. Do you listen to a lot of podcasts?
Yes, I do.
Tell me, you're into crime and stuff, aren't you?
No, actually, I've been definitely more on the entrepreneurial, um, female empowerment. That's sort of been my jam recently.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And when do you listen to them? Like, are you somebody that has to be out there exercising and stuff to listen to a podcast, or do you just chill out at home and listen to them?
Yeah, I would say when I'm exercising, I'm definitely a music girl, like 100%.
Right.
So, but usually I do listen to podcasts while doing something else that's mindless. So, whether that's cleaning or making dinner or something like that is usually when I listen to podcasts.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
Well, and the big news is you're about to start your own podcast show. Is that right?
Yes, I am.
Well, that's exciting. I remember back to when I got mine going, and it's a really exciting time leading up to that. And you're probably overwhelmed with information right now, yeah, about what to use and all that other stuff.
Oh my gosh, there is so much information out there, and technology is hard, you know?
Yeah, yeah, it's
Yeah.
crazy. It's supposed to make life easier for us, but it confuses us more than anything.
Yeah, sometimes that's definitely the case.
And what's your podcast show going to be about?
So it's talking about sex and intimacy and how to really use that to be fully expressed as women.
Yep.
And yeah, everything that goes along with that, the vulnerability, having deeper connected relationships with ourselves, with others, and just really showing up for ourselves fully expressed in the world through the lens of sexuality.
Wow, wonderful. I'm sure you're going to have a whole host of listeners to that show, and people jamming to come on to be guests as well. Designed specifically or targeted towards women, but obviously you're going to have a lot of male listeners as well.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Well, you are a sex and intimacy coach. just so people listening don't think I was walking down the street and asked a random woman to come on the show with me today to talk about sex and stuff, right? So you are somebody that does this for a living. And can you explain a little bit more, I guess, to start off with exactly what you do as a sex and intimacy coach?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say that for me and a lot of the women that I work with, we have grown up in a culture that doesn't encourage sexual freedom or the full expression of our desires. So, based on media consumption or conditioning from families, community, um, most of us have a fair bit of shame, a lot of uncertainty, and we lack the confidence to go out and get what we want, sexually or otherwise.
Mm,
And and so really what I do is I help women get clear on what those desires are that they have and help them to clear and really release some of that fear and shame to allow themselves to be more vulnerable, to develop a more connected relationship with themselves, and then also with potential or current partners, and really have the confidence to go out and start getting what they want. And, that ranges everything from communication to how to have more pleasure and really all the stuff in between. But it's really about just taking a hard look at our conditioning, maybe what we've been hiding from and what we're afraid to let out and show to the world or to show to ourselves or to our partners, and really just pulling it out and showing it to ourselves, showing it to the world, and just being fully expressed and alive and sexy,
mm.
and just, yeah, really really bringing that into our lives to be more connected and have a more desire-led life.
Yeah, that's so good. Where did the interest in the topic of sex and intimacy come from for you? Was there an epiphany moment in your life, or how did that kind of mindset evolve of what you just described of what you want to do and what you are doing?
Yeah, so I think for some people, when they look back on their life, it's sort of like a series of events and they can't really pinpoint where there was a shift.
Mm,
And then there's some people that have those epiphany moments, and I'm absolutely one of those people.
mm,
So yes, for me, growing up, my entire life has been a journey of exploring my own sexuality.
mm,
And, I've done that in a fairly bold way. And that has definitely been interesting. And at different times of my life, I've, certainly kind of gotten some backlash from, what we're talking about with our conditioning or judgment, things like
mm,
that from other people. And, but I've just sort of had this obsession and curiosity. So I continued to explore it for myself. And really, it wasn't until um, about a year ago when I really started getting questions from other women about, and of course traveling too really exposes you to how different sex and intimacy can be in other cultures, right? And I think
mm,
that that was a big part of it as well. But yeah, at this point, I had been exploring with women for the first time, and I actually started dating a woman.
mm,
And that was when a lot of my friends started asking me, "Oh, do you think maybe you've just always been gay?" Or, that happened to one of my friends once.
mm,
Or, have you just never been satisfied with men? And I just had this moment where I realized that all these women were asking me these questions because they were trying to understand my sexuality, right?
mm,
And that they maybe have felt these things themselves and weren't sure how to proceed or how to, maybe they heard the song I Kissed a Girl by Katy Perry and, they
Yeah.
were like, well,
Yeah.
how do
Yeah.
I've always wanted to kiss a girl. What do you mean you just did it? And finally, I just started saying to people, because they were like, oh, okay, are you bisexual? And I was just like, no, like the answer to all these questions is no, I'm just Kayla.
Mm.
I'm
Mm.
I don't have a label. I've explored myself sexually in different ways and with different genders and at different points in my life, and all of it has been amazing and so fulfilling. And that's when I realized that the concept of sexuality for a lot of people, and myself included at different stages, has really been about what we've been taught, our conditioning or labels, or trying to define it in some form or fashion.
Yep.
And when I realized that I was doing enough things that people were confused and trying to define my sexuality, that I just had to say, no, I don't know how to respond to you. I'm just Kayla. That I realized so many women really struggle with how to navigate and explore their own sexuality because of that conditioning, because of the labeling, because of how we try and define it for ourselves and our culture.
Yeah. Fantastic.
So, yeah, so that was the aha moment. And I was like, this is it. This is like,
I'm interested to know, and I'm sure a lot of men who are listening are interested to know, because we're I guess very familiar with the fact that women go out to cafes and they sit down and they talk about everything that's going on in their life, whereas men are a lot more emotionless when it comes to having those types of conversations. Sometimes I won't say all men are, but there's a lot that are, and I'm generalizing, of course. But so these women that were approaching you to explore this conversation with you, did it come up in those kind of coffee moment chats? Is that how it actually started, or was there some underlying reference to it throughout your connections with these people?
that's a good question. So I would say kind of both.
Mm-hmm.
And in my experience with women, sex is actually not that common of a topic for conversation. Or if it is, it's not really done in a vulnerable way.
Yeah.
So I think that yes, maybe women tend to be a bit more comfortable talking about it generally with their friends, but it's still such an unknown. It's still such a taboo. And we all, I get the impression that we are there's so much uncertainty and unknown, and it's too big of a monster to sort of like tackle over a cafe chat, like it's
That's
just
a great way of putting it.
yeah. And so I would say that maybe a few women, especially, friends that I would have catch up calls with that I haven't seen in years because I haven't lived in the US in years. It was sort of like we've had a long-standing friendship and been through a lot of different life experiences together. And so during those catch-up calls, then maybe that was where those questions would pop in. Um, and then otherwise, yeah, that was probably where I would get the most specific questions. Um, but then I would say otherwise, honestly, the most times that it wasn't over the phone with a long time catch up call was it was when women were drunk. we were
Right. Right.
we were like out, and then all of a sudden, like, some those inhibitions are down a bit.
They're all
We've had a
gone. Yeah.
couple drinks, and then it's like,
Yeah.
okay, wait, so tell me, I'm so curious, or oh my gosh, and that's sort of when the conversation would start flowing.
Yeah. Brilliant.
So yeah.
So you have something on your website that says, "Are you ready to up level your life?" What do you mean by that exactly?
Oh man, that's such a good question. So, what I mean by that is, I think for most women, myself included, I've gone through periods of time where I'm not fully expressing myself, whether that's sexually or otherwise, right? And and that comes from a place of fear, of judgment, or fear of rejection, or maybe some shame we have. And so the work that I do with women is around releasing some of that, right? And getting to the root of what those fears and that shame might be to help us really embody our desire and fully express ourselves and have more connected relationships. So both with ourselves and partners.
Mm.
So, and that requires, right, like so much vulnerability and all the things that go along with that. But really, when we do that, we up level. We up level our lives.
Mm.
You know, we
Mm.
experience our capacity for joy and pleasure is actually directly correlated to how much fear and shame we're carrying around.
Yeah.
So, right? So when we can sort of release some of that fear and shame, then we actually expand our capacity for joy and pleasure. And so I guess that's what I mean by up leveling your life, having more joy and pleasure in your life.
Yeah, that's great. I want to open up the controversy cage now because it's time to, I guess it's time to throw some of that stuff out there. In relation to what you're just talking about, I think so much of these inhibitions are created by our upbringing. And I'm talking about the way that we have role models who are obviously our parents, and whether or not they are a couple who show intimacy in all sorts of different ways in front of their children to make them feel comfortable, and for it to be I guess, a very inclusive part of growing up and becoming a person. Because I'm saying this because I come from a household where sex was taboo in terms of a conversation. In fact, there was never ever a time where I was allowed to even ask a question or to hear a conversation going on between my parents, where anything to do with intimacy was allowed. So I'm just throwing it out there to you. Do you think that's a very typical thing, and do you think a lot of this inhibitions come from that situation and how we're brought up in relation to having conversations about sex and intimacy and feeling comfortable with it as a subject and as a process and part of our lives?
Yes, absolutely. And of course, the culture and how we're brought up does vary a lot culturally. But I think for at least my culture, your culture, we're talking about they're similar enough, right?
Yeah.
Um, where, yeah, I think it's absolutely a factor. And, you know, I think the fact that sex is so taboo, and we don't really know how to talk about it, and we don't really know how to then teach our kids about it either.
Mm.
So I think, I don't know about you, but the only sex education that I received in a formal setting was maybe like fifth grade, that horrible gym class where they're just basically using diagrams and show you the science behind how babies are made,
Mm. Mm.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And they don't nobody ever talks about pleasure. Maybe as you get older, your parents, at least for me as well, right? I grew up in a pretty conservative household as well, and where sex was also quite taboo. And, I think for a lot of my friends it was the same. And yeah, as you get older, then maybe, you're like maybe high school age, college age, or whenever your parents may have the birds and the bees talk with you, right? And then the conversation is all about protection, right? It's like don't get pregnant, don't get, any diseases or infections, and that's kind of how the conversation at least from my experience, and I think for a lot of other people, that that's how the conversation goes. But we're never really taught that sex can be a really beautiful experience, or, the word pleasure is definitely never mentioned, right? It's like, I mean, I think some people still resort to the old, like, the stork dropped you off on the front porch, like, we didn't even have sex, right? Yeah. Um,
Yeah, I think that's why, one of the many reasons I wanted to have you on the show today, because as you've already started off talking about, there's no reason why sex needs to be a taboo subject, in my opinion. And this is my show, so I can do whatever I want with it. So you're here to talk about this subject, and there'll be people listening that might have already turned off by now. There'll be others that go, yeah, this is really good, and this is going to be an interesting conversation. So I wanted to provide a platform where we can actually also talk about sex and travel, because at the end of the day, people have sex when they travel, and people get into situations with foreigners when they travel, and they get romantically involved and they share intimacy, and this is all another incredible aspect and peripheral activity that happens when we travel, right?
yeah.
And yet we don't talk about it, unless we come back and say, oh, I had sex with this wonderful person and whatever, and it's a 2-second conversation, but we don't get deep into that thing. And I really wanted to explore that with you today. So what I did was I actually sent out on my social media accounts to my audience to actually pose a few questions to you today. so
Oh boy, okay.
so how about we go through some of those, and I'm sure they're going to open the door for us to continue this conversation. But I want to thank you for explaining where you've come in this journey. I think a lot of the things that you've said, and I'd be really interested to know from my audience, particularly from the women that are listening, are these conversations that you're having with your group of friends when you go out, or do you need to get a night on the wine before you start opening your mouth and having these conversations, right?
Yeah.
So let's get into these questions. And some of the people have given me their names and some have remained anonymous, so let's respect that. And also, your feedback on these questions is your feedback, Kayla. We're not suggesting that these people, need to follow your advice or anything, but it's just your opinion, right? So we'll put a bit of a disclaimer out there for a start. Okay, we'll start right off with the tough one. So Jeff from Toronto, he's asked, do women cheat as much as men do?
Wow. Okay.
I thought that'd get the fire lit up. There we go.
Yep.
Do women cheat as much as men do? Wow.
Wow. That's honestly, I would imagine yes. I don't really know, but I think, some of us might have the notion that men like sex more than women, and therefore men might cheat more than women. And I think that that is just myth. I just think that it's maybe a bit more, women are taught to be ladylike and not talk about sex or how much they want sex, and that's not actually a truth. And so, based on the fact that women probably like sex just as much as men, then I would say that they're probably also as likely to cheat as men. But I think that that is, yeah. I mean, there's so many factors that go into that, right? I mean, who can say? But yeah.
Okay, so your categorical answer is you think they do cheat as much as men.
Yes. But also,
Okay.
I think that nobody should cheat, that you should just be honest.
Yeah, exactly. Oh,
Yeah.
wouldn't honesty get us somewhere in the world if we were honest about
Yes.
everything? Oh, goodness gracious.
Yes.
That opens up a whole new conversation that's going on. Okay, we'll move on from Jeff's question, because now we've got to balance the books, and we've got a question from a lady. Her name is Tara, and she's in London. And she says, or she asks, do you think people are more sexually promiscuous when they travel?
No.
No is your answer. Why not?
I think that people who travel in general are maybe just a bit more free and fully expressed because they are maybe already going against the grain of what would be a like typical lifestyle, right? And so I think that maybe they're just comfortable with exploring and experiencing and acting on their authentic desires. And I think that most of us are probably a bit more promiscuous than we than we maybe show the world. So maybe that's just a symptom, right? Of people who travel, maybe it seems that way because of they're just more comfortable expressing themselves. That would be my guess.
Okay, there you go, Tara. So, interesting response. Now, I've got a question here from someone who chose to remain anonymous, so that's fine.
Okay.
And the question is, what's the best way to maintain a sexual connection in a long distance relationship? Oh, that's a good question. What's the best
Oh,
way to maintain a sexual connection in a long distance relationship?
I think that that varies heavily from person to person.
Hmm.
So again, we all want different things. And so, it's sort of like the love languages, right? We've all got different ways that we like to ex express or show love to other people, and we all have different ways that we like to receive love.
Mm.
And so I think that it's sort of along those same lines of really having that open communication with your long distance partner and saying, hey, what would make you feel really sexy and connected during this time that we're apart? And and then going from there and see where the conversation goes and maybe say, what would be your wildest dream for our long distance, relationship in a sexy way or a connected way, whether that's, some people are really turned on with intellectual conversation or, right? I mean, it could just be a whole host of different things depending on the person. So maybe just to have that open communication would be a good place to start and find out what would be the sexiest and the most connected way to stay, to keep things spicy long distance.
Yeah, I'm with you on that because if I look at that sentence and I focus on the word relationship, if you're in a relationship with someone, whether it be long distance or whatever, as you say, communication's the key, right? So if you are communicating exactly like you said, what are the desires from each side? What understanding and respecting is probably the best way to start, and then you have your answers, right? Once as long as the other person's being authentic, and
Of course.
it's an evolutionary process. Okay, we've got another anonymous one here. So, do you think it's healthy to exchange sexy pictures or have sexy video chats with your long distance relationship partner?
I think again it's so dependent on the person. I think you have to make that determination if it's healthy for you. And I would just encourage you to think about all of the factors involved, right? How, and maybe get to the core of how do you want this exchange to make you feel? How do you want it to make the other person feel? And will using photos and video be the best way to achieve that? Or if you're maybe not quite comfortable with doing that, which I would imagine might be the case if you're asking the question, if there's a
Mm.
little bit of discomfort there, then maybe see if there's another way to achieve that same result, right? Of getting the benefit that you're looking for.
We're in a very unique situation in the world at the moment where lots of people who are in relationships can be potentially separated, right? And
Yeah.
they're living through maybe a period of their relationship that they haven't had or been put in this situation before. Chocolate manufacturers came out with chocolates in an assortment box, isn't it? So,
Yes,
yeah,
definitely. Yeah.
you can take your pick. Okay, next question. Are you enjoying these questions?
Yes, I am.
Okay, good. So we've got Colin from Dubai. over there in the Middle East. And Colin asks, what are some of the dangers in your eyes of having a holiday fling if you are single?
Oh, ooh.
Sounds like Colin's preparing to travel again sometimes soon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, I would say the biggest danger is not communicating. So I think really a holiday fling can be phenomenal. But I think that in those situations, communication is so, so, so important, as with pretty much any other situation. But setting those boundaries and desires right ahead of time and saying, okay, this is just for this set period of time, or this is, my intention, or this is my desire for our time together, or this is a boundary for me, and just being so clear ahead of time with another person about what the fling is going to entail,
Mm.
is really mitigates the risk, right? Otherwise, if you don't communicate, then what are the chances you're going to be on the same page? And then the likelihood of it blowing up is pretty high, at
Yeah.
least,
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay, the next one is from Molokai. That's a cool name. And I don't know where Molokai is because Molokai didn't say. It's a bit sad, this one. I'm bullied in my town about my sexuality. I feel like running away and starting over again. What do you think I should do? Wow.
Wow. Yeah.
Can you relate to this? Is it something you've
Yeah,
had experience with?
a bit. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, that can be really tough.
Mm.
And I think really in times where I felt a bit bullied by my community or the people around me for whatever choices that I was making with my body, and what I was doing sexually, I think that what really got me through it is having even just a one person as somebody that I could turn to, and that I knew loved me unconditionally regardless and wasn't judging me. Um,
Mm.
but I
It
think,
can be hard to find that person sometimes, right?
yeah, yeah, it
Mm.
really can. And it can feel so lonely.
So what would you suggest to Molokai? What's the first step Molokai can take?
I mean, ugh, people are so mean. I just, or people can be, not all people, of course. But I would say, don't let the judgment of other people and the bullying let you stop being who you are, and I would say find ways to really look within yourself and remember and feel into how much love you have for yourself and exactly who you are in this moment. And if you have a friend or a family member that you can turn to and that you feel really comfortable with, oftentimes when we share a burden, it's halved, right? A burden shared is a burden halved.
Mm.
And, if you have somebody that you feel comfortable with, then maybe going to them and being vulnerable and sharing what you're going through. Um, but I would really, my heart goes out to you, and I'm sending you all the love. And I just would encourage you to really, stay true to who you are and don't let the world around you make you feel like you have to conform into someone that you're not, because you are beautiful and you are perfect exactly the way that you are.
Yeah, that's great. And Molokai, I just want to add that you are very worthy of everything in your life. And yeah, I reiterate what Kayla said there. You are beautiful, and those people that have judgment on you, they are the ones that are belittling themselves. They're not belittling you at all. They're belittling themselves. So, and it just shows to me, and I'm quite affected by this question, because it shows the importance of this subject and talking about it. And here's a person that's written in, I don't know this person. This person's written into a podcast show because they're obviously in pain and they're looking for help, right? And it just shows, if we've done this through one podcast show with people expressing themselves about their sexuality and the concerns and things like bullying happening and all the rest of it, it just shows what an important subject matter you are taking up, and to do so, you're applauded for this, Kayla, because people need your help. Okay, let's move on. Molokai, go out there and show them, mate. You can do it, I'm sure. Debbie from San Diego asks, I'm sick and, this is a bit lighthearted, I'm sick and tired of being hit on every time I travel to some beach resort for a vacation. It seems every time I put on my bikini, it sends out a signal. What tips have you got for me to deal with this? What a problem to have. I never have that issue when I put my bikini on.
Oh
So
man.
poor old Debbie's getting hassled every time she gets to a beach resort and puts a bikini on. And this is serious, because obviously this is, intrusion of privacy and all the other things that go with it, degrading of a person and a woman in particular. So what tips do you give Debbie to deal with this one, Kayla?
I guess for me, I first try and think about where I am geographically in the world and what the culture is there. Because depending on where you are, in some countries, that is actually one of the highest forms of flattery, or at least that's the intention, right, behind those words.
Mm.
Um, and I mean, regardless of really what the intention is, I guess maybe trying to shift your mindset a bit on the fact that like it is flattery and trying to at least take it in that way. And then also, you don't have to absorb anything. Don't let it into your energy field, like
Mm.
keep
Mm.
the keep your heart close, and you don't have to pay attention to it. You don't have to respond. Um, I would also say that maybe even responding um, back could encourage it further, depending on where you are in the world too. So yeah, I would just say, that sucks, and you absolutely do not deserve to feel that way at all. And I'm so sorry that you've been dealing with that. But really, the best we can do is we can control our reactions to things. We can't really control um, the actions of other people or how they behave. So yeah, I would encourage you to maybe try and think of it as a form of flattery, and just let it like dive right into the ocean and let it glide off you like the water. Just, like
Yeah,
leave it all behind.
that's a good piece of advice. Dive in the ocean and let it wash away. Yeah. Okay, the next question or comment or sharing comes from Spencer. I don't know where Spencer is. He didn't say where he is in the world, but he says, oh, here's a big one. I cheated on my partner while away on a business trip. I want to man up and tell her, but I'm terrified about losing the kids. What should I do for the sake of everyone in this situation? Whoa. Now, you and I were just talking about this before the show in terms
Yeah.
of, people on business trips and all that sort of stuff. And here we are. We've got a situation where this man is acknowledging his wrongdoing, but at the same time, he's wanting advice on what he should do in this situation.
Well, I certainly cannot advise you one way or another. However, I will say this. In my experience, it's twofold. One is honesty is always the best policy. And two, fear-based decisions are never a good way to make decisions. So yeah, that's really what I can say about it. I'm sorry, that sounds like a really tough situation that you're in, and I wish you the best of luck. Um, but yeah, that's what I've got.
So if someone turned up to you through your website and they were in that predicament, that's the same advice you'd pass on to them?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it, yeah. And of course, I guess I can add to that, approach any situation, and if you are going to have the courage to be honest and transparent, to approach it with love and compassion,
Hmm.
and to really and be vulnerable, and be, just put yourself out there, and maybe express those fears that you have as well, and that could be really scary, but that's, approaching it with that love and compassion aspect. Yeah.
Hmm. Okay, let's move on to the next question. And it's the last question, Kayla. So you're nearly at the end of the questions. It comes from Kathy in Mauritius. What a beautiful part of the world. And Kathy says, or she asks, I am single and bisexual, and whenever I travel, I'm open to meeting people from either sex. My concern is this may not be the best way to meet a life partner. What are your thoughts?
Hmm. I I don't,
You never know,
yeah,
right?
you
You
never
never
know,
know.
right?
Right? Yeah,
And
yeah.
I think that traveling and just meeting more people and experiencing different cultures actually expands our capacity to find a life partner, right? Because
Mm, mm,
we're interacting and engaging with so many different types of people, as well as a higher quantity of people.
yeah. Do you think that people on holiday are more relaxed and because they're in party mode and chilled mode? Do you think that's an increased their sexual awareness at the time? Do you think people are more heightened sexually when they are on holiday for those reasons, that they're more chilled out and haven't got the daily routine knocking at the door all the time?
Probably. I mean, I would imagine that that's probably the case. Yeah.
Hmm. Is that a personal experience? Do you kind of
Um,
find yourself more, what's some words I can dig up here? Are you more flirtatious when you travel? That's one word.
well, I've actually never traveled on holiday in
Mm-hmm.
my adult life. So
Right.
I am usually working, and as a full-time nomad, right? Like it's so for me, not necessarily no.
Yeah.
But I think from other people, certainly in areas of the world where people do go quite frequently for holiday,
Mm.
yes, I definitely think that's something I've observed. Yeah.
Do you think there's an element of it around, like when you sit back and you look at where people travel to and you hear some of the time, and I'm generalizing, you hear some of the time, oh, women say, oh, Italian men are to die for, and there's this conversation around specific culture, specific gender, related
Yes.
to their enlightened, you know what I'm talking about in terms of,
Yes.
I love going to that country because the men are so sexy or the women are so sexy in that particular country, right? So there's a lot of that going on as well, isn't there?
Oh my gosh. Yes, so much. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. And
Yeah.
and I think that's something where when you're in your own country and you're assimilating every day with the people that you assimilate with, when you're taken out of that, and let's face it, it's the same with the food, it's the same with the scenery. Everything's heightened in your senses, isn't it? And
Right.
that whole intimacy, sexual, I guess, vibration is also another thing that's included in that. When you're in a different country and you see the people, I remember the first time when I went to Scandinavia and I went to Sweden. I was like, my goodness, every single woman here is gorgeous. Like, I couldn't. I said, how do they make them here? It was like unbelievable. But my impression was, and you know, I was young when I first went to Sweden, and I was thinking, my goodness. And because I was traveling, and because I was more conscious, I guess, of looking at all the things that were different, whether it be the food, the people, the nature, it was all. I think when we travel, we have this heightened sense of awareness of what's going on around us.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's that constant sense of novelty, right?
Yeah.
And it's just so exhilarating and in every aspect. Yeah, like the food, the atmosphere, the people, right? It's all the language, it's all like raises all of our senses, I think, our sexual ones too, for sure.
Mm. I wonder why that is. Why are we so prudish when it comes to having those conversations?
I think, yeah, I think it's just something that we haven't really popped the lid on,
Mm. Mm.
And so nobody knows what to say. Everyone's nervous. Nobody knows how to talk about it. All of us got that silly sex ed class in fifth grade,
Yeah. Yeah.
and like the
Yeah.
rest of it, it feels like we're all just figuring it out as we go. But, because, which is life in general, right? But with all these other topics, we talk about them and we're like, oh, yeah, like, oh, how'd you do that? Oh, okay, cool. This worked for me or that didn't work for me. Like, have you ever had a conversation like that about sleep?
Yeah. I want to get back to a couple of things on your website because it might help us unload some of this. You
Okay.
state you help women get what they desire. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Yeah. So I think that I do all of my work through the lens of sexuality and through the process that we already talked about, with getting clear on those sexual desires and releasing our shame and embracing vulnerability and really unconditionally loving our bodies and being able to communicate more effectively and know what we want, boundaries, desires, all of that through the sexual lens. And we build that confidence to fully express ourselves in that way. Sex is one of the most, if not the most vulnerable way to do that,
Mm.
right? And so if we can really look at that stuff and get to the root of that and have confidence in asking for what we desire sexually, then that cracks open our whole world.
Mm.
Like if we can have that level of courage and confidence and clarity in that area of our life, then it just blows the whole thing out of the water, right? And it gives us so much more clarity and confidence to ask for what we want and be clear on what we want in the rest of our life as well.
Mm. Do you think that this whole movement around the world that we've seen in the last couple of years in relation to whether it be Me Too or sexual equality and gender equality, do you think that evolution of what's happening in that space is redefining sexuality as we know it around the world between women and men today?
Yes, I do.
Mm.
Um,
And is it heading in the right direction in your opinion?
in some ways, yes. In others, I think that it's human nature for us to want certainty and to understand things, right? So to me, I think that sometimes we have this desire to break free from, whatever the current or previous structure may have been. And and that desire to break free is so beautiful and incredible and takes so much courage. And but then in some instances, I feel that we're so quick to then go back to condensing or labeling or defining things that we just broke free from.
Mm.
Um, and in that way, it feels a bit limiting still. But regardless, I mean, it's still progress nonetheless, right?
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think it's just human nature for us to want to understand and define things and have some certainty, but that does often manifest in, those labels and things like that. So yeah, that's just my opinion.
Okay, cool. Now, you also write that you want to help women claim their sexual power. What do you mean by that one?
Yes. We are all fierce, sexy, badass goddesses. And I just, we as women are so worthy of love and pleasure and connection. And I don't know, I don't think very many women really, really feel that as a wholehearted, embodied, hell yes, you know?
Mm,
And yeah, really just feeling powerful and feeling just all the things that make you feel like sexy and turned on, and just embracing that, and having the power to own that, as all of us as women have that inside of us. It's already there. It's
mm.
already there. It's living in all of us. And so really finding that and like turning it on and really like claiming our power as as women is, yeah, I get a little excited.
No, it's great. I hear it. And I'm thinking as you're saying this, I'm going back to our earlier conversation about our upbringings and how it's installed in us to either be suppressed in this area or not. And I guess what you're saying there is that because of a lot of our conditioning when we're young as well, particularly women, if they haven't had that opportunity to embrace their sexual power and grow up with it feeling comfortable, then it's always hidden, isn't it? And it's not until we see shifts like we are now around the world where marketing companies and the mass commercialization of the world has started to now breathe and open up and say, hang on a minute, we don't need to have wafer thin models on the front covers of magazines anymore, because that doesn't indicate or reflect a typical woman around the world, right? So we're now seeing women reclaiming their sexual power, I think, through advertising, where we're seeing women who are beautiful women, no matter how big they are or whatever. It's irrelevant, right?
Right.
And I think we're seeing that change now, and I think that's a fantastic. It's a long way to go though, but I think in terms of,
Yeah.
it's a great step that's being taken. Wouldn't you agree with that?
Yes, absolutely.
Mm. Now, something else you say: love yourself unapologetically. Explain
Hmm.
that one.
I don't know a single woman who has not struggled to just love herself exactly for who she is, and whether that presents as body image, or I mean, I say that's probably the most common, the most common way that it presents, for women, but really loving ourselves too for all that stuff that we're suppressing, all of those maybe hidden desires or things that we're keeping stuff down, and really loving that part of ourselves as well, and loving our bodies and loving our minds and loving, just every single particle, every single atom, every single, all of it, just really embracing and loving ourselves, unapologetically.
Now,
Yeah.
you talk about falling in love with your body there, and do you think people, when they travel, do you think they're more or less conscious about their body image?
Oh, I don't know, man. I think I think it could be both. I think it's really interesting for me. I've noticed that, beauty is defined differently in every culture. And, you know, you also see so many different sizes, shapes, colors, like, everything when you're traveling. And I think that it brings a bit more perspective, at least for me. That's how I felt,
Mm.
was, oh wow, like beauty isn't just what I've seen, with my community, or the magazines or the media that I was shown growing up, right?
Mm,
And
mm.
so it sort of expanded my mind a bit to that and gave me some other perspectives. But then at the same time, I feel like there are a lot of people that travel, it feels like travel bloggers or things like that, maybe, for the gram.
Yeah, yeah,
And so
yeah,
I see a lot of that side of things happening, maybe more than I would see it in a culture where, people aren't traveling as much. So I think it's kind of both, but I definitely think that traveling allows you to fall, at least for me, allowed me to really fall in love with my body in a way um, that I hadn't been able to previously.
yeah. That's beautiful. I
Yeah.
just want to share a little anecdote I've got about that, because I remember back in the day when I used to travel around the world a lot. Probably showing my age here, but whenever you got on an aircraft, um, everybody would be dressed really immaculately. You know,
Yeah.
like whenever by people would travel, they'd go out of their way to look good, and whether they be on business or whether they be going on a holiday, you could see that people put in extra effort to really make themselves look good. Nowadays, sweatpants and activewear and everything's taken over because of it just seems that's the way people travel now, right? Because they want to be
Yeah.
comfortable and the rest of it. But there's now you talk about embracing vulnerability. Interested to hear about your views on this one when it comes to sexuality and intimacy.
As the vulnerability expert, the amazing Brene Brown so eloquently puts it in, I believe it was one of her TED Talks. She says that vulnerability is the most accurate measure of courage.
Mm,
And I think that is just, it really, for me, it just like hits deep, I'm like, oh, wow, like that. Yeah, I feel that. And yeah, I think that vulnerability is also how we become more connected with other people. And that doesn't always mean like shouting all of our deepest, darkest secrets to the world, right? I mean, that's not vulnerability either, right? It's
mm,
picking and choosing those moments with the people that are relevant, and
yep.
the conversation, right, that's relevant, and sharing what might be kind of uncomfortable and scary.
Yeah.
And but doing so is so courageous and really brings us closer to whoever we're sharing with, and also encourages vulnerability in return. Um, and so, yeah, I think that the only way to become more connected and have greater intimacy in any relationship in our lives, whether that's with ourselves, whether that's with family members, friends, romantic partners, that we have to embrace vulnerability.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way to close it up there. Okay, I'm going to put all the links to your sites on the show notes today so that people can easily connect with you, because I'm sure this is going to open up a Pandora's box of questions and people reaching out, because I think we've touched on some excellent stuff today. Before we go, I want to ask you a couple of quick things about your own travel. I picked up on something you said earlier. You've never traveled on a holiday before.
Yeah, not since I was a kid. So yeah, I guess when I left to start really being nomadic a little over 2 years ago, I had a full-time job, and I've just been traveling and working, full time, but as I move around.
Mm. And where have your travels taken you to?
Oh my. All over. I've spent quite a bit of time in Europe, Latin America, Africa, a little bit of Africa, and parts of Asia.
Okay. So you've
Yeah.
been all over the world.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to put you on the spot. What's the sexiest places in Europe?
The sexiest places in Europe.
Yeah.
Ooh. Okay. So I'm a Latin American, like that
Yeah.
that would be my like top choice is like men and women in Latin America are just the spiciest,
Yeah,
in
we'll
my
get there,
opinion.
but
But yeah, okay,
I'm
all right,
starting
all
off
right.
with Europe.
All right. In Europe, I think that Eastern Europe
Yep.
is really, really interesting, and the women are quite striking,
Hmm.
and the men are very manly.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, let's move to Asia. Where are the sexy spots in Asia?
Oh, well, Bali is definitely full of the sexy Australians. I'll give you that one.
Right. Okay.
Um,
It's a
but I
shame you
would
got to go to
say,
Bali to get sexy Australians.
yeah, well, I haven't been to Australia, so that's where I've
Right.
experienced them.
Okay.
Um, Otherwise, I would say Japan. The people are beautiful.
And they live a long time.
Yeah.
So if you fall in love in Japan, you're going to get your money's worth, right?
Yeah, I bet that their poll that they do for sex in Japan is with people over 45.
You're going to get me hunting now. I'm going to be on the internet researching the latest Japanese sexual surveys, and we have to have another show and talk about. Okay, let's talk about Latin America.
Um, I would say Colombia, 100%.
Okay.
So, but I love the salsa. There's so much passion and energy, and the people, the men and the women, are gorgeous, and they're also so charismatic.
Yeah,
And like anyone that can dance, that's just like my kryptonite. So,
that's got you.
yeah.
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 Okay. So Colombia, sexiest country in the world,
Oh,
or have you got another one?
no, I'm going with Colombia.
You're going with Colombia.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, if you're listening to the show today and you've just heard Kayla's pick for the sexiest country in the world, let us know what yours is. We're going to have a tsunami of responses now of people saying that their country is the sexiest country in the world. What's the plans for the future, Kayla? Are you still going to be nomadic? What's the plan going forward once we can all start traveling again?
Oh man, that is a tough question. Yes, I will absolutely still be nomadic. It feeds my soul and inspires my creativity so much. I think it's been about a year since I was in Latin America, and now um, that I'm back in the US so close to it, it's like it's such a tease, you know? I'm like, oh, it's right there. So I think that that's probably where I'll head next.
Okay, back to Latin America.
Yeah.
What has all this travel in terms of how's it evolved you as a human being having all these travel experiences around the world? What do you think it's embraced to you and your soul as a human being, all these experiences?
How have I not evolved from travel? I think is the better question.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
yeah, I mean, it's completely changed me and the way that I think and just how I prioritize like my time, my energy. It's just I look at everything completely differently. It has
Mm,
completely changed me as a human. I believe for the better. Really opened my mind to different cultures, what could be possible, what it's just yeah, it's really been so transformational for me.
mm. It's a must, isn't it? It's something that I think should be mandatory.
Yes,
Everybody should be forced to get out there and see the world at some stage, right?
I totally agree. Yeah.
Now, just before we close up today, I'm going to ask you to dedicate the show to someone special in your life. So, who would you like to dedicate your episode to today?
I would love to dedicate this episode to my grandma Yo, Sharon Yoder, who has always encouraged me to live my best life fully expressed and really embrace myself as a woman. And she has really demonstrated that beautifully in her life. and just is so bold and fabulous. And I would not be here doing the work that I'm doing today if it wasn't for her influence. So,
Wow, that's beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's really gorgeous, and I'm sure that's going to be Where is your grandma now?
she is here in St. Louis, and I am going to hang out with her in 2 days. She's like ready to listen to the podcast. She's so excited. So, yeah.
Wow, that's so delightful that you've got the opportunity to do that with her. So that's brilliant. And hi, Grandma. I hope you have a lovely time listening to the show with Kayla. She's done a great job today, and we're all excited about her starting her own podcast show. So when are you hoping to have that up and running, Kayla?
Oh, couple weeks. Couple weeks.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'll let everybody know when it is up and running, and then you can run on over there and listen to all the great stuff that Kayla's going to be talking about. Are you going to have guests on your show, or are you just going to be sending out advice and tips and all the rest of it?
No, I will absolutely be having guests.
Okay, brilliant. Well, they'll be queuing up after this, so you'll have people wanting to knock your door down, that's for sure.
Perfect.
Listen, thank you very much. One thing I want to say before we go today, the show's had a marketed effect on me, in particular one area of it, and I'd like to dedicate the show to Molokai today and just say, Molokai, that you are absolutely beautiful and worthy and everything, and the future is bright, so keep smiling and keep your chin up. Yeah, so just wanted to say that before we ended up today. Kayla, it's been wonderful having you on the Global Travel Channel podcast show. Come back again sometime and have a chat to us. I'm sure there's going to be hundreds of questions coming in from people all about sexual things, and be happy to have you back on the show.
That would be great. Thanks so much, Mark.
Kayla Yoder was my guest today, speaking from St. Louis in Missouri in the United States, and we talked about sex, intimacy, travel, and a lot of other great things, including my questions from my audience. Thank you very much if you submitted a question to the show today. It was much appreciated, as it is to all my listeners who listen to the show. Now, don't forget, if you want to get more episodes of the Global Travel Channel, all you got to do is head over to the website at www.globaltravelchannel.com. It's pretty easy to remember, and there you can find all the places you can download the episodes from as well, like Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Castbox, Google Play, iHeartRadio, and there's a whole host of others that are all listed there on the website. If you loved Kayla as a guest today, please vote for her in the 2019/20 Global Travel Channel Podcast Awards. Yes, we're having our inaugural awards this year on June the 9th, and before then you can vote for Kayla by simply going to the website and clicking on the awards page. If you love our content, please tell a friend, family member, or even a work colleague about the Global Travel Channel. And if you love this show enough to write us a review, please do so. We're always grateful for reviews we get from the audience, and we can keep coming back to do more episodes for you. Well, that's it for this particular episode. I've really enjoyed going through this episode with you all. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did, and I can't wait to bring you another one on the Global Travel Channel podcast show. Until then, my name's Mark Philpott, and I wish you all a very happy and safe week ahead.